Thank you. Well, thanks for that question. It's a really good question, and it's a really difficult one, and that's, in a way, why we wrote the book, because there isn't a simple soundbite answer. But if you read the book, I think what you'll see is how we describe how these various attempts are made to create, well, what we call a scientific Potemkin village, things that look like science, sound like science, but they aren't really. And so it means we actually have to pay attention to the sources of our information, both journalists and ordinary people. And I was reminded of, there's that great scene in the film Ghostbusters where Bill Murray breaks in and says to Sigourney Weaver, "Stand back, ma'am, we're scientists," right? So in a way, that's what these people do, right? They assert that they're scientists, and they have some kinds of scientific credentials which make it seem credible, but they aren't actually really doing scientific research. So that's really the key question, is to ask, who are these people really, and are they really doing the research? And so it means that one has to look for sources from genuine scientific communities like the National Academy of Sciences, or major leading research centers like the National Center for Atmospheric Research or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. These are the places where the real science is being done. Places like the American Enterprise Institute, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the Heritage Foundation, these are not places where real science is done.
But in fact, as you point out, Eric, in your book, there are a number of really reputable, established scientists who are doing some of this work. And I guess the question I would put to you is, are they just people who have been bought off? Are they a part of some conspiracy to, and if so, why? And do you think they believe they're being objective, or do they believe that they are being paid well to knock down established science?
That's, I think, 3 questions, if I counted correctly. And the first, and I want to, it's the simplest part to answer, is, do we think it's a conspiracy? And the answer is no. To our minds, conspiracies are done by people who try to be invisible and anonymous behind closed doors and with smoke, lots of smoke, and sometimes guards. But this was not. This was done by people who were very well known, who were attached to well-known institutions. Naomi named some of them. And right under our noses. It was done quite publicly, and we have simply chosen to ignore it. So it's not a conspiracy. What it is a network of people interested in a particular set of things. So what are those things? Our scientists, and we focused really on a handful of very reputable senior physicists, are people who became science managers sometime in the middle of their career. And as science managers, no longer really had, or no longer doing scientific work in the sense of doing research on data sets and publishing in journals and so forth. They became managers. They were also Cold War conservatives. They were interested and became interested, were very convinced in the need to compete with communism through free market capitalism. And after they retired from active research, and even as being science managers, they became more and more political actors and not scientific ones. And what they were promoting is a particular form of economics, libertarian economics. Sometimes it's called neoliberalism, is a larger term of it. But they became convinced that they needed to promote this. And to answer the final question, are they being objective, or are they simply bought off, or are they lying? And the answer is, if you believe strongly enough in a thing, no matter what that thing is, you lose the ability to be objective. You can't look at the data anymore and see what people who don't really care about what the political outcomes of the interpretation are. And that's what I see, and I think Naomi sees, in the work of our actors towards the ends of their lives, as they are working more and more as political actors. They became really convinced that they were right, everyone else is wrong, and they parlayed that through this network into enormous amounts of confusion about the science of climate change.
We'll come back to that. Heather, the first time I went to Asia, and I flew from Hong Kong to Shanghai to Beijing, and I realized I couldn't see the Earth for just forever. I thought, why am I recycling my garbage in the United States? What is the point? It seems so hopeless. And in your book, You talk about how many of the things that we do now may seem and may well be insufficient. Taking our bags to the grocery store, or they may be counterproductive, like automobiles powered by corn fuel, which produces as many problems as it solves. And you also describe how the dire problem of the climate crisis is that many people are trying to answer it with the next phase of consumerism and environmental consumerism. So the answer to all of the garbage in the air or the hole in the atmosphere that we produce is to consume differently. And I would ask you, is this hopeless? Is this entirely wrong? Or is everyone misguided to be doing these things? Should they not be doing them?
Yeah. There are some things that the choices that we make, I mean, it comes down to the question of, so often this conversation comes down to the question of what we do as individual consumers. And what I'm trying to do with my book, in addition to some other things, is just sort of to try to broaden that conversation. Because there are all kinds of decisions that get made way before you and I end up in the grocery store. And those are the kinds of decisions about the use of natural resources, the use of materials that are extracted from ecosystems, and then the waste, that is produced, where that goes, how that's handled, ranging from CO2 emissions to, what's going to happen with this after the panel's over. So one of the things that, it's interesting because confusion is also a really big part of how this operates. A lot of people buy organic food, for example, and wonder, is this really helping? A lot of people, increasingly people are offsetting their carbon emissions from flights or driving or from their home energy use. Does that really work? Where does that money go? And so I looked into these things, and some of the things that I found is that there's deforestation happening in order to expand organic cropland. Carbon offsetting projects often fail on the ground, and that carbon is not offset, but we believe that it is. And so we end up with this sort of an environmental equivalent of collateralized debt obligations, fake environmental wealth. And the other thing is, if we're continually looking at the symptoms as a place, as a site to solve environmental crisis, we are missing the key aspects of how to really solve this, which is to do with our economic and political systems. And you hear it all the time. People say, oh, well, we're not doing this. We have the technology we need. We can do so much with existing technology. There's no lack of know-how. There's no lack of material. We can do this. But everybody always says, oh, it's a lack of political will. So how do we start to get our political system to function in a mature way, to be able to actually address this stuff and to give us more options? And how do we shift our economic system so that it's not based on endless intensification and expansion of consumption, be it slightly green or not? And that sort of greening of consumption is a way, it can improve things a little bit, definitely, but it is in no way in proportion to the kinds of changes that need to happen, like you're saying, recycling versus the massive, pollution of the atmosphere.
May I add something to that? Because I really appreciate that comment, because one of the things we talk about in our book that's relevant to that is that one net result of all the activities that we've researched is that the American people are confused. We're confused as individuals. But it's really important to note that that wasn't the purpose of these activities. The purpose was not to confuse individuals and prevent individuals from bringing their own bags to Trader Joe's, right? The purpose was to stop government action, to stop government regulation, to undermine the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, to undermine the Kyoto Protocol, to cast doubt on the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer. It was all about preventing the big action that would really make a difference. And I think that's really a crucial point, that what we do as individuals definitely matters, and we want to feel empowered as individuals. But what happens on the level of states, governments and international protocols is hugely important, and that's really where the action of our story lies.